Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. My name is George Tsetsekos. I'm the Francis Professor of Finance and Dean Emeritus here at Drexel, one of the co-chairs of this interesting and timely conference, along with Michael Papaimanou from IMF and Zlava, who is not here with us, but she's expected to join us around 10:30. And I'm very, very pleased to be here with you today. And this is a wonderful building that we have, but we have a brand new dean, actually, who is not new, but to the Berkeley College of Business, who is a great host, who will open our conference, Michael Jensen. He has been a professor of international economics with expertise in trade. He has served the business school, the Berkeley College of Business, in various capacities, including the director of the doctoral program, associate dean, and recently following a national search. Just a couple of weeks ago, perhaps, or so, he has been appointed permanently in the position of dean, and we wish him great success. Paul, can you just open our conference here? Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. And I want to start by thanking George for all his work. Not only all his work in putting this great conference together, but George actually is largely responsible for this building. During his 10 years as dean, he did a tremendous amount of work to get us into this wonderful facility. So thank you, George. Welcome to the 36th annual Monetary and Trade Conference. It is absolutely our pleasure to be partnering with GIC again. I think we've had the honor of hosting and sponsoring this for about 15 years with GIC, and so we're really thrilled with that. And this year, we're really excited that the Philly Fed has joined to also partner in putting on this great event. And I think their addition will add incredible insights to your discussion today. So we've had wonderful partnerships with GIC and the Philly Fed over the years in various things, but I believe this is the first time the three of us have come together for this conference, and so very excited about that. It's going to be a great conference this year. Obviously, this is an incredible topic. Digital currencies are drawing increasing attention from around the world, and I think your conference today, your discussions will provide a great framework for thinking about the role of digital currencies as a medium of exchange, for transactions, and as investment vehicles, and for the future of the world economy in this setting. The rise of digital currencies poses challenges and opportunities to regulators and central banks. Businesses and organizations and investors are also looking for creative solutions and efficiencies in transactions. At Lebeau, our faculty and students are working with our business partners to develop research-based solutions to many of the business challenges arising from today's technologically driven challenges. So I'm sure your discussions today will provide additional contributions towards understanding solutions for the challenges related to digital currencies and outline future prospects of the evolving technology. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. I wish I could stay for the whole thing. I'm going to try to stay for the beginning, but again, welcome and have a wonderful day. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Paul, and it's my pleasure now, as we proceed with the program, to introduce to you Bill Spaniel, the Senior Vice President of Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. He has tremendous experience with the board, and he oversees the bank's supervision, regulation, and credit department. Bill will introduce our keynote speaker for the beginning of the sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So probably as the least forward-looking person in the House from a supervisory perspective, I'm paid to be a skeptic. I actually think this is a tremendous time to come here, and I think it's a tremendous slate of speakers we have. So congratulations to the Global Interdependent, to Drexel, and to our Consumer Finance Institute of Philadelphia. I spent a lot of time thinking about how transformative this could be, and transformations lead to great changes and great strides, but they also leave many people behind. And so I'm hopeful that we are, through these kind of thoughtful things, thinking about the transformative nature of moving into a digital economy, but also ensuring some of the things that have been hallowed for us, particularly the Federal Reserve, just access to payments, equal access, fair access, and an ability for these cryptocurrencies or bitcoins or digital, even the blockchain, to really move us forward and not leave people behind. So I think this is an important time to do that. And to help us do that, I think I'm pleased to introduce Christine Parlour. Christine is the Sylvan Coleman Chair of Finance and Accounting at the Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley. She's worked in institutionally complex areas, market microstructure and banking. She currently is focusing on bank balance sheets and the effects of payment systems, so her research is timely to what they're doing. She's written for major finance and economics journals, and she's been on the NASDAQ Economic Advisory Board and is currently on the steering committee of the new Special Studies of Securities Markets. I also happen to know that she took the red eye, and I think we've given her enough coffee to make her inventive. But I hope that the rest of the day will be stimulating enough to keep her and her California colleagues with us for the day after the red eye. I can appreciate the effort. So with no further ado, let me introduce Christine.
Can everyone hear me? Great. So this is an incredibly pompous title, I think you have to agree. And I'm not going to answer any questions, and I'm certainly not going to value cryptocurrencies. What I'm going to do is just provide a sort of overview, just some essentially stylized facts. And the reason why I think this is just a fascinating area is, you know, we now have a new way to raise risk capital. Historically, people have used venture capital, small funding mechanisms, and typically the amount of capital being supplied has been somewhat limited. Now it's pretty much open, it's a free-for-all. So this is just a it's a big change, it's a new thing. The other thing that I think is sort of interesting that we really have to understand is if you think about an asset that's native digital, this is completely different from an existing asset that's been digitized. And it's completely different because a native digital asset doesn't have a home. It lives up there in, you know, sort of the cloud. It doesn't have a country of residence. That means it doesn't have a natural regulator. It means it doesn't have a natural investor base. And so this is a very different way of thinking about an instrument than we usually think about it. We usually think about instruments as having a home and a regulator, but now we're in a new world. So I think it presents absolutely unique challenges. So many of you are in the business of regulation, so that's your problem. My problem as an academic is just to sort of state the problems. So I'll leave it to you to solve. But just as a prelude to what you're going to do, I'm going to just talk about some basic financial properties, so we sort of understand what these things are. I'm going to assume you all have a good working knowledge of the market and what they are and how they work. So I'm taking it from there. If anyone has questions, just please let me know. Okay. So this is based on joint work that I've done with Alhu and Uday Rajan. And essentially we do two things. First of all, we just look at initial coin offerings or initial token sales. I mean, they're pretty much equivalent, those two descriptions. And we sort of look at their performance. Secondly, we think about secondary market trading. As you know, issued coins are traded pretty much internationally on a number of various exchanges, most of which aren't in the US for regulatory reasons. And so we just think about what those market characteristics look like. And before I sort of start diving into numbers, and some of them are a little bit eye-popping, let me just say that this market, because it is completely, pretty much unregulated, assets can move anywhere in the world. There's no centralized data source. There's no centralized reporting requirements. we're used to, especially from a finance point of view, about thinking about, assets that are traded on, say, New York. We know exactly how the tape works. We know exactly, the background of the companies. Here we don't. Everything has to be hand collected, and that means, of course, that massive amounts of data are going to be missing, or they're distorted in some way. So even though, one makes, obviously, attempts to be as accurate as possible, you have to be aware that this is just data that's being dug off the web. All right. So first of all, let's think about initial coin offerings. So this is the process where an entrepreneur or somebody who wants to design a coin makes it known that he wants to raise funds and basically issues coins. So we looked for data, or we looked for information on initial coin offerings between 2013 and 2017. And as you know, with an initial coin offering, the process is essentially the person who wants to issue coins writes what is known as a white paper that describes the reason for the coin and essentially the mechanism through which he or she is going to raise the capital, and they post it. There's no centralized posting location. Typically these are done on various sort of blog sites. They're just sort of all around, so you have to sort of scrape to find them. We took the white papers and we read through them. And if you ever have an afternoon when it's raining and you're not quite sure what to do, go to whitepapers.com and read some of the ICO white papers. Some of them are hysterically funny. And some of them are very serious, and some of them are hysterically funny. So pretty much because it's somebody who's sitting around trying to raise risk capital. I was trying to shed light on matters, but it went dark for a moment. But okay, let's keep on going. They can decide the system. They invent the mechanism. So when we think about IPOs, which is sort of natural given the language, ICO, we know exactly how they work. We know about book building, we know about indicative prices, we know about how the process works. With ICOs, the entrepreneur who's basically deciding they want to raise capital can just devise any system that they want. They have complete flexibility. So there's a huge institutional difference in the sense that these things work, they can work very differently. Most of them are based on a fixed price. Some are take it or leave it offers, but there's sort of different mechanisms. Most of them require a transfer of either Bitcoin or Ether to some specific wallet at a specific date. At that point, the new coin that's being issued or token gets transferred basically to the person who wants to buy it. After issuance, one of the many exchanges around the world that trades these things goes into essentially secondary market trading. And so you can trade newly issued coins against either fiat money, so US dollars, yen, or what are known as real coins. So Tether, something that's supposed to be backed by the US dollar, but nobody's actually ordered the accounts, or backed by gold. But so you can typically trade these things. And we use historical data, so we transfer things into essentially US dollars. So to give you a sense of what our data look like, this is the number of ICOs in the data by year. So we're going from 2013 to 2017, so we ended the end of 2017. And basically this sort of maps what we see in the ICO market. There was sort of a small amount. 2017 things exploded. So these data are very much from the beginning of the ICO issuance phase. Okay, so this is the requisite table. It's going to be the first of many. And this gives you summary statistics. So we take the ICO that's listed in the white paper, and then we say, if you got an allocation on before the thing was issued, and then you subsequently traded it, what would your returns look like? And the first day return, so I buy in the ICO and then I sell in the secondary market. The mean is 4,746%. This is not annualized. This is a one-day return. As I said, it's eye-popping. The reason why it's just so extraordinary is it's pretty clear if you go along the top to max. There is one observation in our data where the first day return was 226.300%. So pretty clearly we're talking about a very skewed distribution. So to some extent the mean is perhaps not the variable that we want to look at. Perhaps you want to look at the median. So observations on either side are balanced. So the median is 115%, which is still large, but it's not quite as large. It's massive. So, given the size of these numbers, I mean, how do we want to think about it? How do we want to interpret this? Well, it's important to remember that there are differences between initial public offerings and ICOs. So there's these questions about whether or not ICOs are in fact selling securities. So there's the Howell test. I mean, I'm sure lawyers in the room could discuss this much more coherently than I can. There's this legal issue about whether or not they're in fact securities. From a finance point of view, we don't really care. Right? So from a finance point of view, if you give me any instrument that I can then sell for fiat money, I don't really care whether or not a regulator calls it a security or not. As far as I'm concerned, dollars go in as I buy this piece of paper or this coin. Dollars come out as I convert it to fiat currency. And as far as I'm concerned, it's essentially a way of transferring money across risk. So from a finance point of view, we don't really care. But from a legal and regulatory point of view, of course we do. The other thing to remember is that the size of these ICOs is actually much smaller than initial public offerings. So in particular, the median amount raised in the US in 2016 in IPOs was 94.5 million. And ICOs is much smaller, 6.4 million. Perhaps the way to understand or think about these returns is more in terms of, say, venture capital, the kinds of returns that they get. Still, the returns that we appear to get on the ICOs are much, much higher than we get from any sort of venture capital types of returns. In addition, these things are very liquid. Right? You can actually trade them for fiat currency. The last thing that I think it's sort of interesting to think about is the mechanisms, the market mechanisms are so very different. We like to think that the prices that we see are the outcome of both the sort of fundamental value of the underlying security and how they're traded. Because this stuff is completely unregulated and completely international, it's just a wild west as far as market mechanisms are concerned. So comparing any kind of data about these tokens or coins and their prices is problematic because the market mechanisms are so very, very different. So those are sort of three caveats or things to think about, differences between IPOs and ICOs. What really surprised me looking at these data was how many responsible adults there appear to be in the market. I mean, let me just be really flat about this. The market is completely unregulated. Nobody is saying, I'm going to audit white papers. Nobody is saying, I'm going to make sure that you're a reasonable person. Nobody is doing background checks on anyone. Yet, there's a large number of these ICOs where people were legitimately raising money for legitimate business reasons, even though they happen to be incorporated in Switzerland, which, as we all know, is a somewhat dubious location for business reasons. And I thought that was really interesting because a lot of our regulatory structure is based on the idea that unless we have massive regulation, there will be rampant fraud. Yet, in this market, there is fraud, absolutely. I mean, there have been a couple of cases where somebody just raised $664 million for dubious reasons. But there's a large amount that is just completely legitimate. And I thought this was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. It sort of gave me hope for my fellow man. The other thing that I found really interesting about ICOs is, you know, the ICO returns are very, very high. Now, obviously, our data are only looking at those ICOs that succeed, so there's a massive selection bias. But at the same time, when we think about IPOs and stocks that go public on New York, we're also looking at a sort of selection bias. We're looking at the sort of the best firms, the top ones. And from a sort of an in-the-weeds finance perspective, there's been a long discussion in the finance literature about how much money is left on the table during the IPO process, just trying to understand why the offer price is so low compared to the first day of trading. So this is a big puzzle in finance. And it would appear by looking at these data that actually maybe the puzzle is the other way around. Maybe it's in fact the case that IPO initial returns are way too low, right? If we have a completely unregulated benchmark and the IPO returns are very, very high, yet the ICO returns are very high, maybe the IPO returns are very low. So that's just something that I want to throw out for my finance colleagues. Okay. Any questions up to this point? Yes?
You're talking about pricing. And for IPOs, we kind of have a methodology to price the initial price of the stock.
Mm-hmm.
But do you see, as a scholar, there is a way to help the entrepreneurs, especially for ICOs, to come up with the initial pricing of the token?
So interestingly enough, there's an entire industry on Wall Street that basically helps people trying to figure out what the indicative price should be. So interestingly, there's sort of an ecosystem has arisen in the cloud that basically provides similar services to entrepreneurs who want to issue tokens. So endogenously, this has started to arise. During our data, we don't have that. This was still at the time when people were just trying to figure out what they were worth. But it's very, very interesting that something analogous to what we're seeing on Wall Street has in fact arisen in this ecosystem. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was going to ask a question related to the IPO puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So, for those who maybe aren't familiar with it, if I sell my house and that person turns around and sells it again for twice its value, I'm generally sad about that, not happy about that. So how do the entrepreneurs feel that in general, using the medium, they've sold something of theirs and then the person they sold it to is able to flip it for twice the price? Do they feel bad or do they feel good?
I mean, I have no insight into their souls.
Could you repeat the questions, please? It would help.
Oh, yes, sorry. So,
Perhaps I can give you the microphone?
if it is in fact, if it is the case that an entrepreneur sells a coin and somebody the next day, somebody buys the coin and then sells it the next day for a massively high price, is it in fact the case that the entrepreneurs are upset about that? Is that sort of problematic? So one could well be. Two, we've seen this sort of increase of what look like lockup periods, essentially for people who are participating in teams that issue coins. So the environment is just getting more and more institutionally complex as we go through time. I think one of the things to think about is to say, well, if I didn't sell the coins, what would I do? So for many entrepreneurs, the choice is basically to have no funding at all, or to basically try to get from VC and potentially get rationed out. So yes, there is a perfect world in which they get all the benefits from their idea in selling the coin and the future value of that coin, but they're probably comparing it to a benchmark where they sit in a cardboard box because they have no funding, right? So they might be relatively happy.
I suspect that it's those imperfections that are greater with the ICOs that explains the difference, not the fact that, you know, as you speculated, IPOs are somehow experiencing returns that are too low.
Yeah, but it's a complex issue, so I'm not willing to concede ground, but I will agree that there's points for discussion. Okay. So let me talk a little bit now. We'll move to secondary market trading. So secondary market trading occurs on internationally. So Bitfinex, GDAX, lots of different exchanges around the world allow people to trade a variety of coins for either fiat currency or real coins or tethers or whatever you will. Okay? We got historical data from CoinMarketCap. This is an aggregator, and basically what they do is they just ping all the different exchanges and they report a weighted average, or they report an average of daily prices. What's sort of interesting about the secondary market in coins is that there's not an opening bell and a closing auction. Basically, the trading is 24/7. So in order to get these prices, you basically have to just lock down some, point Greenwich Mean Time or whatever you want to sort of determine what your reference point is. So the idea of opening and closing, the sorts of usual things that we do when we try and understand trading prices, is just, we don't have that. So what do we have? Well, our data set includes 1324 cryptocurrencies. There are way more cryptocurrencies than many people realize. There are lots and lots and lots out there. We keep a cryptocurrency in our data set if we have at least 1 year's worth of data as of November 23rd, 2017. And they have a market cap of at least 1 million. So that leaves us with 222 cryptocurrencies. And the total market cap as of November of 2017 was about 250 billion. There are about 150 currencies, 180 currencies in the world. So 220 is small for a number of assets, but large for a number of currencies. Question?
Yeah, how many fell out because they were, either they just went away or they just never had $1 million cap? Like what brought us down from 1,300 to 200? The value or the fact they just
So the
ceased to
difference
exist?
between 13, so there were 2 screens that we used, 1 year's worth of data, and 2, the market cap. So the breakdown between which ones didn't have at least 1 year's worth of data and which ones had the lower market cap, I'm not sure. It's very, so ideally you'd want to basically get a list of everyone who attempted an ICO and every ICO that failed or was fraudulent. There are a couple of websites that report that information, but it's very difficult to go back and to get the white papers. And so this is why it would have been great if somebody right at the beginning of time had kept information on everything, but they didn't. And so trying to get coherent data is actually really irritating. Okay, so with all those caveats, what do things look like? This gives you summary statistics on secondary market trading. So what do I have here? I have the mean daily returns in percents. So these are not annualized. So the mean daily return across all these 222 cryptocurrencies is about 2.53%. The median daily return is about 1.8. Okay? Daily return. The market capitalization is in millions, so the median is about 8.7. And I would argue that those are relatively high daily returns. So Would you agree?
Yes.
What do we want to think about these assets if we're going to be trading them or holding them in a portfolio or regulating them? The distribution is really skewed. Super skewed. So instead of being a nice normal distribution, it basically looks like this. This is essentially what we would call a Parlour. Okay? So it's a very, very skewed distribution. These other graphs, these other pictures, are basically logged values, and the reason why they look like nice normal distributions is because we've taken the log. So you should take away from this that instead of being sort of nice normal distributions, the cryptos seem to have very, very skewed. So some do really well, massively well, and some do pretty badly. Okay? Given the fact that they're so skewed, does that mean you'd never want to invest in these things? Well, this is the classic sort of picture that you see in textbooks about, if you had $100 and you invested it, what would it look like? And this sort of tracks two different portfolios. One, an equally weighted portfolio, and other, a market capitalization weighted portfolio. And basically, starting in 2014, what would have happened had you invested? This is all the, had I invested? And, well, it's sort of going up. And these two things track each other. And they track each other, basically, so there's something going on with equally weighted and market weighted, or market caps sort of start looking a little bit the same. But essentially, we're just seeing sort of a massive run-up. Interestingly, if you think about crypto returns, and you just do a very simple exercise, like saying, if I constructed an optimal portfolio, what would my life look like? The efficient frontier that we know from sort of basic portfolio analysis just looks exactly the way it should. This is essentially looking at mean daily returns and portfolio volatility measured by standard deviation. And basically you have this very sort of nice convex figure. What that tells you is, yeah, if you put money into these things, it goes up. There's massive volatility. If you construct an optimal portfolio, or if you put a little bit of finance science behind it, you can get much better combinations of risk and return. There is clearly a benefit to having a portfolio of these things, as opposed to investing in an individual security or an individual coin or token.
Question?
Yes?
What is it that varies as you move along this curve? Is the fact on when you
So what's varying as you move along the curve is portfolio weights in each of the different cryptocurrencies. So essentially, you're adjusting the weights, right? So this is a classic figure that basically takes into account the fact that they're not perfectly correlated, and so you get some benefit of diversification. Yes.
This is in sample?
Yeah. Okay. So what do we learn from this? Well, basic finance theory tells you that investment portfolios you can construct them, you can do things with them, and this is telling you that for these cryptocurrencies, efficient diversification can reduce risk. A natural follow-up question is, are there other sources of risk? Is there systemic risk or market-wide risk? What else is going on? And let's see. So what this is it looks at daily and monthly correlations with other assets. So usually we think that if assets move together, basically that could be indicative that there's sort of a common risk factor. So what's sort of interesting is the correlation of altcoin, generally coins, with gold, essentially is pretty much close to zero, right? Statistically, it's close to zero. What about with the S&P, which we think sort of captures macro risk? CAP-N, CAP-N, CAP-N. It's also close to zero, right? So these things are not, seem to have the relationship that we think that many different assets and asset classes have. But the first line is correlation with Bitcoin. Bitcoin correlation is pretty high, and we think it's non-zero. Just to sort of draw a picture that reiterates that information, this looks at each of the cryptocurrencies, and it looks at pairwise correlation with daily Bitcoin returns, the pairwise correlation with S&P excess returns, and the pairwise correlation with gold returns. Pretty much the gold returns, as you see, is centered around zero. There's some that are positive, some that are negative, but it's basically centered around zero. On average, gold is not driving, or there's not a relationship between gold and what's happening in the gold market, what's happening in the crypto market. The S&P 500 excess returns. This is also centered around zero. So basically in CAP-N language, the beta is zero. So a little bit positive, a little bit negative, but it's centered around zero. By contrast, if you look at the Bitcoin daily returns, the correlations, zero is over here. This is clearly not centered around zero. So essentially what that says is that these coins move with Bitcoin. And you can actually go a little bit further. You can sort of do principal component analysis, which is just, there are lots of sort of different techniques to sort of see whether or not things move together. And if you look at the first principal component, so the thing that causes most of the variability, right, you can extract a variable, and that variable basically moves with Bitcoin. So just to put this in numbers, the first principal component explains about 11% of daily return variation. And for daily returns, the correlation of that with Bitcoin has a magnitude of about 0.68 or 0.7, let's say. So what are we learning from this? This basically says that crypto returns bounce around, but as Bitcoin bounces around, so they bounce around. So if you think about sort of standard portfolio construction in an equity sense, we think about basic risk factors and trying to control it. It seems to be that Bitcoin is essentially a risk factor in this market. Bitcoin returns are driving what's happening in the crypto market. The good news is, of course, that we have futures, right? So if you're doing any kind of more complex portfolio strategy, having futures that allows you to lay off risk is a good thing. Okay. This gives some information on altcoin portfolios in general, on Bitcoin returns. And this is over a 2-year horizon, and it looks at daily return regressions. And we do it on just, we do an equally weighted portfolio on Bitcoin returns. We do market weighted on Bitcoin returns. And then we do it basically on including all these sorts of different types of possible explanatory variables, including gold return, S&P, constant, and so forth. And basically this just sort of reaffirms that Bitcoin returns have explanatory power, or you could think of it as a beta in a CAP-N sense, I guess, of what's happening in the crypto market. How you want to interpret that, that's a different issue altogether. You can interpret Bitcoin as essentially being the, how you buy these altcoins. Maybe that's the driver of value. You could think of a speculative bubble in Bitcoin, which is driving a speculative bubble in the cryptos. We're not saying, we're just saying that they move together. Yeah?
Can you distinguish between all digital currencies, including Bitcoin, having a common factor, and Bitcoin being the driver of the returns for the other digital currencies?
No. I mean, that's a,
So if you put
that's
another...
a causality thing. I can't do that, no.
No.
It's not that I don't want to, but I just, so what do we learn from all this? In secondary market trading, once coins are out there, massively huge daily returns. I mean, it's just ridiculous how high they are. The biggest source of risk that we can identify is essentially Bitcoin itself. The question then becomes, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is it a Ponzi scheme? What is the source of value? Why is this happening? Why is Bitcoin driving these returns? Well, I mean, how do we want to think about it? As I said before, from a finance point of view, to some extent, we don't care what a financial what an instrument is. If I buy it with money and then I sell it and I get money out the other end, I don't really care what's in the middle. As far as I'm concerned, any financial instrument is just a black box that money goes in one side and I take money out at the other side, right? So whether or not you call it a coin, whether or not you call it a token, basically, you could think of it as like a non-dividend paying stock, right? You don't get any material benefit from holding it. You just get it when you sell it. So in that way, you could think about, the way to value these things is essentially just the capital gain. And the capital gain is derived from some sort of surplus that people are getting from using it, and you're just getting the benefit from holding it, but you're getting a capital gain. That's one sort of way of thinking about it. The other way of thinking about it is the way we think about commodities. And people have thought a lot about commodities, which is there's a use value. What's driving the use value in terms of cryptocurrencies could be, there are lots of different ways that you could think about why a cryptocurrency would add value. But this is like a convenience yield. So to some extent, there's a benefit to me from holding this thing. The benefit could be it gives me an option to buy other cryptocurrencies. If you think about something like Ether, which is essentially the gas on which all these other coins are running, right? It sort of makes sense. In another project, we have very preliminary work that seems to suggest that use value is in fact the right way to think about these kinds of returns. It's very difficult. On a metaphysical level, it's very, very difficult to think about why people are valuing a security. We can never see people's motives when we buy. We just observe the evidence that they bought or they didn't buy, and then we try and draw inferences for why they're doing it. So it's a complex problem. Okay, so let me conclude. I think I probably went way too quickly, but oh well. There have been astounding changes to financial markets over the last 10 years. And cryptocurrencies are one of these very, very dramatic changes. It's a new investable class. There's no question about it. The market capitalization is sufficiently large that people should start thinking about having some exposure in their portfolios. This is pretty clearly a potential source of competition to existing venture capital. To some extent, the venture capital industry is very inefficient in the sense that there's a limited supply of capital and there's an excess supply of projects. If we think that venture capitalists actually ration out good projects, then that's sort of a social problem, and maybe this is a solution to that social problem. It brings with it other costs and benefits. but still, I mean, it does provide this very specific benefit. Bitcoin returns, they seem to be driving the crypto market. So Bitcoin returns are pretty much fundamental to what's happening on the asset side of that market. And even though crypto returns are different and should be different, perhaps, from standard assets, there seems to be evidence that there's a little bit of a bubble going on. And this is something that time will tell. Question?
I'm confused because you say that Bitcoin drives the value, but that's a correlation. Is that also causation? Or is there an external causation to both? So I'm confused on that.
Yeah, no, it is not causation, it is correlation. In the same way that pretty much any asset pricing model that's statistical in nature, like Farmer French, this is also a correlation, right?
Yeah.
And so in that spirit, this is how I would describe it. Ex post, I can come up with stories, but this is just the information that I have. Question?
And I was wondering why, what would be the reasons for seeing this very wide fluctuation? I can think of two reasons, and I would like to get your reaction to that. One is that this is a market that attracts individuals that have relatively high risk tolerance in comparison to other individuals. So this kind of individuals, then they are going to be relatively wide fluctuation. The second one is that the regulators over the world have not made up their minds about how to treat that, and then sporadically, suddenly in one country or another, the regulators come in and institute, like in Korea, for example, they institute a very tough regulation and things like that, and then this also causes a very large variation. Do you have any thoughts about that?
So you raised 2 points. One about why there are wide fluctuations and could it be a question of basically different risk tolerances. There are 2 sorts of wide fluctuations that we see here. One on individual returns, 2 in the cross-section. In the cross-section, across different cryptocurrencies, I would argue that the reason why we see big fluctuations is because this is completely unregulated. So what we're seeing is just random draws from projects that typically never see the light of day in financial markets. So it's natural that there would be much more variability than we see in the very truncated data that we only see that have gone public, say, on New York. That's a very restricted data. With crypto, you just see everything. 2, yes, it's quite possible that the people who invest in cryptocurrencies are very different from people on the bus, say. That said, there are people who are effectively risk neutral, who are like hedge fundy people. Certainly in the Bay Area, they're essentially hedge funds that are actively investing in the crypto market. So whether or not the mean risk aversion differs from, say, the mean risk aversion in New York, it's not clear to me. It would depend on the dollar value investing in the individual securities. And so that's not clear. Second, the question being whether or not variability is driven by regulatory uncertainty. It's pretty clear that there is regulatory uncertainty around cryptocurrencies as the thinking has evolved. So in the US, I mean, it's evolving very slowly, but rapidly gaining ground. I mean, fora like this will help that move forward. The thing about cryptocurrencies that's sort of fascinating is it comes back to this idea that these are native digital. So you can move anywhere. You don't have to be located anywhere. So Bitfinex, for example, which is one of the large exchanges, they're registered in the British Virgin Islands with apparently over half of the companies in the world. British Virgin Islands presumably are a large place. And their trading offices is in Hong Kong. So regulation is, for a native digital currency, is remarkably easy to evade. I mean, how do you regulate? You can regulate products that go to the consumer, but realistically, you can, people can buy these things and put them anywhere in the world. So it's very, very difficult to see how regulation can really have bite, or regulatory uncertainty can have bite. Yes, if people are domiciled in New York and they want to do things on, in a New York way, yes, they can be regulated. But generically, the vast pool of money is just moving around in the cloud. And this is not something that is really, really going to be hit by regulation, I think. So I don't think that that drives volatility. Question in the back.
Are the currencies where you convert this to fiat money, are those regulated? Or not the currencies, the exchanges, where you actually turn it into something you can use to buy inflation?
So what they're, money, AML, all this kind of stuff, money is tracked very carefully. So the solution that we're seeing in this market, or solution, perhaps that's a wrong word, they're what is known as tethers. So these are supposed to be 100% backed by US dollars that are being held, I think at the moment, in banks in Taiwan, but that's unclear. And so people trade tethers with the idea that this is 100% backed. This is a cryptocurrency, and you can trade it against goods because it's supposed to be backed by US dollars, but it's not a US dollar. I'm not exactly sure how the international money flows track tethers, but my belief would be that it's very difficult to do. Right? There are these sort of lots of workarounds. I know in countries with specific currency controls, like Chile, they do a lot of trading in tethers. Will?
Two questions here. The first one is, do you observe any pre-sale data on these ICOs? That's also a big part of this process. And the second one is, you mentioned the empirical evidence is consistent with cryptocurrencies or tokens as having use value rather than claims to cash flow. So what exactly do you mean by that? Do you see from the white paper that tokens that describe themselves as cash flow rights would drive the result to a lesser extent? Is that what you mean?
So we don't have data on pre-sales. So when we calculate our ICO price, we're strictly looking at the price in the token market, or in the white paper, and taking that and comparing it to the first day. So the comparison with IPOs is not clean. We're fully aware of that, but sorry. Two, in terms of the evidence that says the crypto probably is valued for its use value, I didn't go into it in great detail, but basically it turns out that if you think about a regular security, the volume shouldn't really be affecting the price at any point in time, right? So how large the volume is shouldn't really affect the price level, because we think the price level is pinned down by the expected discounted value of the cash flows, right? So that could be on high volume or low volume, doesn't really matter. It turns out that if you look at those kinds of relations, so if you look at those sorts of relationships with securities, they're pretty much flat. There's no sort of relationship. If you look at it with Bitcoin, it's like this, right? It's very, very clear that there's a relationship between the price level and the volume. That sort of tells you that the more people are using it, essentially the higher the value is. And if people anticipate more use, that's going to drive the value higher. So this is consistent with the idea of it being a use value. Michelle?
I was thinking also about the use value, and you compared it to the VC market. And I'm sort of trying to think through this. If these cryptocurrencies are earning a much higher return than you get in a lot of the VC portfolios, does that suggest that these are the better projects that are being funded by these ICOs? I was just trying to think through what the comparison would be.
So first of all, as I understand it, the VC data are just nightmarish. We're not quite sure what's going on there because it's all kind of secret. But I think what is true is you get these massive big hits, you know, like I funded Twitter, I funded Google. And so there are these massive return anomalies. And we don't know enough about the other tail. And so because the size of these ICOs are relatively small, presumably that's the action in the tail, right? And that's the information we're getting. I would think that there are large fixed costs to certainly having fancy offices in Menlo Park, right? I mean, actually I know there are large fixed costs to having fancy offices in Menlo Park. And so they probably screen out not projects that are sort of somewhat smaller, right? And so, you know, with VC, you're probably looking towards those things that are going to be larger, with these slightly smaller, and so that probably drives it. But, I mean, this is all wild speculation, yeah. As is Bitcoin trading, yeah.
Hi, of course, thank you for the excellent presentation. Could I ask you just to maybe step back a moment, and how would you characterize the U.S. federal government approach right now to cryptocurrency regulation, and could you speculate on where you think it's going?
I am probably the least qualified person in this room.
The question is, where would you like that direction as it is like?
So, I think the only I will leave it to the regulators in the room. I'm just not going to go there. Let me just say though that there are a lot of things in the world that look a lot like cryptocurrencies, that aren't crypto, that aren't sort of cool, but basically do the kind of same thing. Coupons, right? Coupons. They're kind of like cryptocurrencies, but they're really uncool. So it would be nice if the framework was coherent, that it wasn't based on sort of, you know, complex techno computer mumbo jumbo, but was actually based on, okay, what is the fundamental economics here? Thank you.
Thank you very much.